So you want to learn JavaScript, but reading the documentation isn't it. You want something practical to do in order to learn JavaScript, as it is so complex and really hard to understand on paper. If that's the case with you, then congratulations my friend, you have found yourself the right place to learn JavaScript from, because today we are gonna make this awesome counter using JavaScript, and we're gonna go through all the steps that are required to build this beauty so that you can follow up and learn some concepts of JavaScript along the way. The HTML for this project is pretty simple. What I have to do is click on this fancy icon to create a file and name it index.html. I mean, what else could I name it? Your mom? No, right? And now inside the index.html I have to write an exclamation mark and click enter. As simple as that, you will have a boiler template, already written the HTML format. And I'm gonna name it counter, and inside this body we have to write so simple HTML that you will be amazed. Okay, so the first thing is you have to make a div by the name of counter section. Okay, so I have a shortcut for you to make it. You can click on dot counter section and enter, and there you have it, a div with a class counter section. It's pretty good shortcut if you want to use, and then enter. Inside it I have to make a counter div. This is basically our div which will have the main counting inside, like 0 1 2 3 and stuff like that. And then I have to make a bdn div, and inside this bdn div I will have 3 buttons that will control our counter, of course. And wait, let me just click dot after the button so that I can add a class using this shortcut, and it will be our decrement button. Very nice, which will decrease the value of our counter. And then I will use this shortcut to create 2 more copies of our button, and then the second one will be named reset, to reset all of the counter value to 0 if the client wants it, if the user wants it, sure. And then the increment button, which will add in the value of our counter. Very nice. There we have it, fellas, the HTML of this project. Pretty simple, right? Easy as stealing a lollipop from a kid. You were expecting it or not, but our project looks like trash right now, and it is not so user friendly to look at. So we have to make it a little beautiful, and to do that we have to click on this fancy icon again and make a file by the name of style.css. By the name of it, we're gonna use this to style our project. But before doing anything in the style.css, I first have to go inside the index.html and then link the CSS file to the HTML file, unless it won't work, obviously. So the third option is what I click on, and boom, we have successfully connected our style.css. For the CSS, I have set things up in such a way so that it is easier for you to see what influence does this style has on our project. So the CSS is gonna take a heck ton of our time, and this is not a CSS tutorial video, so I'm just gonna paste pre-written CSS code here so that we won't waste much of our time in styling, because come on, who just sit there and write CSS codes online and expect people to watch it? So boom, there we have it, CSS. And I'm just gonna quickly explain everything. The body is targeted here so that our main counter, this div, is centered by using these 3 property in the parent. So body was our parent, I have used these 3 property now that the child is in center because of that. And the width and height is also set. The default margin padding is removed by me, and then I have basic width and height stuff in the counter section, and in the counter again basic border radius and all that stuff. And the button is pretty special because I have put substantial work in building these buttons. Look at them, wow, how beautiful they are. Haha, I'm just kidding. I've just copied them from the internet, and you can do that as well, because again, we're not going to waste any time in CSS. There's already plenty of pre-written CSS out there on the internet. I'm gonna drop the link of these buttons in the description so that you can get these beautiful buttons for yourself. But you know, mostly our CSS is done, and this is how our counter looks. Now all that's left for us to do is add some JavaScript functionality to it, so that not only does it look like a counter, but it also works. Now that the styling is done too, we have to proceed towards the final step, which is the JavaScript. Oh boy, I'm so excited. And you know the drill, click on the fancy icon and then make a JavaScript file. So for that I have to write script.js, boom, and then we have our JavaScript file. The very first step that you have to take inside the script file is to store the elements that have a role inside the functionality of your project. You didn't understand what I just said? Let me explain it in a bit. So basically this is your project, right? And this has many components to it: the plus button, the reset button, the minus button, and the display. So you have to figure out which are the components that have a role inside the JavaScript functionality. Okay, so let me identify it. The first one will be the minus, of course, because if I click on it, it will decrease the value of our counter. So it has a function inside our whole functionality. Okay, the next step will be reset. It is resetting. The third one will be the plus button, which will increment in the value of our display. And the fourth one will be the display itself, because it is changing via the help of JavaScript. So we have successfully identified four of our components that have a dynamic role in our project. Now we just have to store them inside a JavaScript constant, and doing that is as simple as drinking water, because all you have to do is write constant and then name the constant. In my case, I am trying to store the element decrement button, so I'm gonna name it in according to it. So decrement btn will be it equals to, and then I'm gonna write document. So what document does, basically the document is our HTML. So when I write document, it is looking up inside the HTML. But right now there is a problem, which is it doesn't know where is the document. So I have to link the JavaScript to our HTML first, and we will do it at the bottommost of our body, so that if an error occurs, it doesn't affect our HTML at all. So script, and then I have to write source, and it will be our script.js. There we have it. Now we have successfully linked our JavaScript to our HTML. Now it will know that when the user write document, I have to search inside the HTML file, and in order to search anything, I have to mention a specific method, JavaScript method here, which is query selector. Now what this method does is searches inside a document through classes, IDs, or by the name of the element itself. So I have grouped our elements in accordance to classes, like this one's name counter section, this one's name counter, and stuff like that. So I'm gonna target them using those classes. So dot decrement was the class of our decrement button, so it will store the element decrement button inside this constant. Okay, so I have to repeat this step 3 more times. Okay, so our first step is completed. Let me write it here in comments. Storing dynamic elements was our first step. So the first step was easy, and the second step is much more easier than this, which is setting event listeners. Event listeners are certain functionalities that inspect on a particular element to see whether a user does something on it. And if a user does this on a button, does this on an element, that will be done by the event listener. For example, I have many buttons here, and the first one, decrement button. If the user clicks on the decrement button, I have to tell JavaScript that we have to run the decrement functionalities. So I can list it in the event listener, so that the JavaScript knows to look up at the decrement button to see whether the user clicks on it or not. And in reaction to that, it will run a function that will perform our decrementation. Now it's time for the practical. So decrement button, I have to list the decrement button in the event listener. So decrement button dot add event listener. So we are adding an event listener to it, so that it listens to the decrement button, it watches the decrement button whether something happens to it or not. And then I have to write the event about what should happen on the decrement button that we run a function. So I'm gonna write click, that if the user clicks on the decrement button, we gotta do something, and that very thing should be a function. So I'm gonna name a function right now, which is not defined, but I'm gonna define it later. So it will be decrement btn. Very nice. A quick correction to be made here, it is decrementation, not decrement button. Right now we have only called the function named decrementation, but JavaScript doesn't know any function by the name of decrementation, so we have to define one, and that is our third very step, which is defining functions. Okay, so basically a function is any group of code that does a particular task and that could be repeated and can be called conditionally. So I'm gonna make a function here, function, and this function of decrementation is gonna do a particular task of decreasing one value from our counter. Alright, but now I have to check whether the code up until now is working or not, so I will write alert and then working. So if the user clicks on the decrement button, the working should be alerted. Now I'm in the browser, and if I click on decrementation button, alright, our code is working. So that's a great news. Now we will proceed further. But before doing anything inside the decrementation function, I first have to come up here and then retrieve the counter element. Okay, so I've got the counter element right here, and inside the decrementation function I first have to extract the value from our counter, the current count basically, so that I can decrease one from it. Alright, then I'm gonna write counter value equals to the counter and dot text context. So this basically is a property that extracts any text inside a div. So the counter div has the text 8, so it's going to extract it and save it inside our counter value. Okay, now I have to decrease 1 from it. Counter value minus minus, so it's going to decrease 1 is the short form of this, but I'm gonna still write the short form because you know short is always better. That wasn't what she said. But still, I'm gonna write counter and then I'm assigning the value back to it. Okay, so the work I've done here is pretty simple. First I have extracted the value of our counter and then decreased 1 from it and then assign it back in. And before checking it inside the browser, I have changed the value from 0 to 8 so that we can know that the value is decremented, so that we can have a value to decrement. And now, moment of truth. If I click on the minus button, the value of the counter should supposedly reduce. And boom, there we have it, fellows. Our first functionality is completed of decreasing the value from our counter. The incrementation is as simple as the decrementation was, so I have to copy it down and then change decrementation to incrementation like this. Alright, and then I will copy this function again, and instead of minus minus I have to do plus plus so that it adds 1 to our current value of counter. And I also have to change the value here, increment. Alright, and inside our project, if I click on plus, boom, there we have it, our second functionality done. And if I click on minus, both functionalities are working like a charm. And now it's time to head towards our reset functionality. And for that, inside our code, I have to add an event listener to our reset button. So reset button dot add event listener. So it will add an event listener. On the event click, what you have to do, JavaScript, is that you have to reset the count, of course. And then function, I have called the function, but it isn't defined. That's why it is showing red. So function reset, and then brackets and its body. So now it is defined. Now the reset functionality is the most easiest one out here, and for that I have to do counter dot text content is equals to 0, boom, and it will convert the any count value to 0 in an instant. Okay, now let's check it out. So our initial value of 8 is here. If I click on reset button, boom, it converts to 0. How cool is that? Our project is almost completed, but there's still a minute bug that I have to fix, and that is if I click on minus button, the value when it's 0 turns to a negative number, and that isn't what we want, because in a counter, a count value cannot be less than 0. The least number would be 0, and then we will increment on, and if we want, then we can decrement, but less than 0 is not accepted, so we have to fix that. And towards the decrementation function, I go and I write the condition if counter value is equals to 0, If it's equals to 0, basically we're comparing the counter value with 0, and if it turned out to be true, then what we have to do is that we have to leave the counter value as it is, which is 0, and we don't want it to decrease further from here. Else, if that's not the case, if its value is higher than 0, then what we will do is that we will decrement its value. It was so simple, the bug is fixed, and now let's check our final product. And before that, I have to convert the initial value back to 0, because when we start counting, we count from 0, not from 8. And this is our project completed, a completely functional counter. If I click on plus plus plus, it will add the value, minus will decrease the value, and reset will turn its value back to 0. And that was it about our JavaScript counter. If you guys find this video useful, please consider liking to this video and subscribing to our channel. The link to the source code of this project is provided in the description, so if you want to get this project, check out the description where you'll find the link to its source code. It was Crooks at your service, now signing out.